Trey, you said in week 0, all football is good football. And we're certainly putting that to the test here in week 3. We've still got a full breakdown for you, though. All the games, all the lines, all the action right here on the 3 Technique.
One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
4-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Hello, everybody. Welcome in to the 3 Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. I'm Mitch Mason, joined by Trey Reeves and Garrett Turney. Guys, week 2 delivered. It was a scheduling delight. You had fantastic matchups from morning till night. This week, maybe the exception. Certainly not what week 2 was, not what week 4 is going to be. I mean, you talk about ranked matchups galore in week 4, but still, there's a lot to dig into here. Some very intriguing matchups, despite missing those little numbers next to the team names that we're excited to get into. And Trey, I think this is almost like a landmine Saturday, right? This feels like a week that you could have a lot of ranked teams or teams that are fresh off a loss come into the week assuming one thing and leave really applying that ice pack if they're not careful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always the quiet ones. Every time we look at the slate and say, this looks like a down week, maybe not one to pay attention to, 2 or 3 just extremely crazy things end up happening. So I'm looking forward to see what college football has in store for us this week. Even if it doesn't look good on the surface, there's always a couple crazy things. And in addition to what you said, Mitch, we've also got a ton of big time matchups next week. So some of these teams are going to be looking ahead, peeking ahead a little bit and overlooking some very worthy opponents this week.
I think it's really, we get to this point every year, right? Where we learn a couple lessons in week 1 and week 2, and we tell ourselves, okay, don't overreact. There's nothing to extrapolate to the end of the season. But then it's like by the time we get to week 3, we just assume that teams stop growing, stop changing, that we've reached that final form. That is very much not the case. And Garrett, as we look ahead to some of these matchups like a Kansas State Mizzou, like we'll lead off with, there's a lot that we still don't know about these teams. Like, could Missouri put it all together and upset a Kansas State team that's looked really good? What are you looking forward to the most as you look down this slate of games?
I'm just looking forward to seeing who kind of rises to the top out of this. It seems like, every single year that we say the same thing, right? You can't win a championship in September, but you can lose it, right? You can lose your chance at a championship. You can pick up that big, ugly loss. You can, eliminate yourself from contention from the playoff early. There's, at least one, if not a couple more teams that could really do themselves some damage this week. Looking at, someone like an LSU traveling to Starkville, that could be a trap spot. They could eliminate themselves from the playoff in week 3, if they don't pick up this win against Mississippi State. So, you have to make sure that you're keeping your focus. You have to make sure you can't overlook anybody. And I think that when you get these sleepy weeks, that's when you start to see some of that magic start to come true. And, I'm looking at a lot of these games up and down the list and pretty excited to talk about where those upset spots could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a number of them, of course, that we're going to get to here in just a few minutes. But of course, before we get there, if you're a new subscriber on YouTube or over on the podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you here. We post twice a week. Sunday mornings are our recaps. Thursday mornings are our previews. You also might have found us from The Ledger. That's our betting segment over on YouTube exclusively. So no matter how you found us, welcome. We're glad to have you. Head on over to Instagram, Twitter, at 3TechPod. You can follow us for more updates and all the college football coverage there. Of course, guys, we do that in collaboration with the Transfer Portal CFB. They are kind of the mothership for our college football coverage. We write a weekly headlines and review article for them. And of course, they've got you covered that's powered by No Context College Football, football memes, information. A lot of research goes down every single week. They have a great podcast as well. So head on over, check out their work. Garrett, you could run the banner. Of course, we are also brought to you by our friends over at homefieldapparel.com. They have some tremendous clothing options that they are working on over there. Home Field is your preeminent source for college football apparel, or just any apparel, honestly. If you're a college sports fan, head on over to homefieldapparel.com. Get yourself some of the most comfortable, the best looking gear. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see Garrett's got a bunch of their shirts off in the background. I'm actually wearing one under this pullover. Shout out Oregon State. But the best part of it all, at 3Tech Pod is our handle. 3Tech Pod gets you 15% off your first order. You can also find a code, a link, I should say, with a code on our Twitter account. You can buy directly through that link and get 15% off if you've already done so. So once again, homefieldapparel.com, head on over, check them out. And fellas, with that being said, let's get into our big three. Now, we took a bit of a different approach this week, right? Normally there are 3 games that really just jump off the schedule at you. Next week, we're going to have to debate heartily over which 3 games get that coveted spot. But this week we went more with kind of a fluid approach, right? We all kind of looked at the schedule, had our input, weighed in, and, kind of voted on which of these games would be included. And the first game that came to mind for me, I don't think it's going to come to mind for a lot of people, is number 15, Kansas State at Missouri, an 11 a.m. kick on the SEC network. And guys, I'm so intrigued by this game for a couple of reasons. I think Kansas State's offense is legit. They've been running over their opponents these first couple weeks. But I'm not convinced that Missouri does anything particularly well, whether it's offense or defense. I don't know that they play one side of the ball at an above average level. And yet this line is only Kansas State -5. You look at the offensive weapons that we're going to see on display, and it's RJ Garcia, Phillip Brooks for Kansas State. Of course, we've talked about DJ Giddens. He's the leading running back for the Wildcats. Will Howard is a gunslinger, one of the most unsung quarterbacks in all of college football. On the other side, it's the Luther Burden story, right? What is Luther going to do this week? Last week, he had a tremendous catch that helped Missouri squeak out that win over the Blue Raiders of Middle Tennessee State. In this game, the line smells weird to me, but there's nothing that I trust Missouri to do other than play really good defense. Even if they limit Kansas State on the offensive side of the ball, what have we seen from Brady Cook? What have we seen from the Missouri offense that didn't even beat the Blue Raiders in convincing fashion last week to make me feel like the home team can compete, the home team can win here? I'm curious to have your input on this game. And Trey, we'll start with you. I'm on Kansas State minus the number here. I just can't find a reason to go with the Tigers.
I am as well. And I get that this is a rivalry game. I get that this is, Missouri's big home out of conference game, as Gary pulls our prediction graphic up there. This was a 7-point line last year with Adrian Martinez at the quarterback for Kansas State. And Kansas State won this game 40-12 in Manhattan. So if you're telling me that I get fewer points, I know it's on the road. I know it's in Como, and Como is going to be rocking for this rivalry game. But Kansas State has a better quarterback. I know they lost Deuce Vaughn. They have a lot of playmakers on offense. And I think their defense maybe even be a little bit better this year than it was last year. They have to cover fewer points against a Missouri team that I think is kind of more or less the same as what they were a year ago. Yeah, I'm taking Kansas State all day, every day in this game. I think it's going to be a competitive game. I don't think it's going to necessarily be 40-12 like it was last year. I think Missouri maybe has a better ability of putting the ball in the hands of their playmakers a little bit more this year. It certainly seems that way a little bit more on the early goings, but unless Missouri's just been holding something back for this game, what have we seen so far to give us confidence that Missouri can keep this one close? I really haven't seen anything. I know our friend Dan Keegan loves his Missouri Tigers. And I know that he's probably fuming hearing this take, but I just haven't seen it from Mizzou yet. Maybe they show it for the first time this week, but the safer bet to me right now is Kansas State.
Yeah, I don't think that Kansas State has that same level of playmaker as a Luther Burden, right? I think Luther Burden clearly is going to be the best playmaker on the field, but Kansas State beats Missouri pretty much everywhere across the board outside of that, at least in my estimation. I think that they're going to be a lot better at the quarterback position. Obviously, we've talked about DJ Giddens plenty on this podcast. Big fan of what he does and his 6.7 per carry so far this season. And again, I just think it's going to be about the better team winning out. The -5, it does feel like one of those what does Vegas know situations. But at the same time, I'm going to lean into what I think I know, and I'm going to pick Kansas State to win this game by a lot more than 5.
Missouri has not exactly exploded offensively. Against South Dakota, they won 35-10. Last week against the Blue Raiders, they won 23-19. The Tigers are averaging just 215 yards through the air per game. So Brady Cook has struggled. The offense has not moved with any sort of efficiency. Their defense is I think they're right on the top 30 in total defense. So I really like what they're doing on that side of the ball. But without an elite offense that I believe can keep up with Kansas State, this is one of the more, in a week where there are a lot of big numbers and there are a lot of lines that make you want to not take them at all, right? Just pass instead of sit on the fence and maybe fall off on the wrong side. This was one of the more confident picks I think that I had. So I'm curious, can Kansas State back it up? They certainly have had the gauntlet throw down by Texas, right, in the Big 12. Kansas State has to come prepared each and every week if they're going to compete in the Big 12 conference, if they're going to make statements that, hey, we can compete with the likes of Texas, Oklahoma as well. For me, this is one of those games. Let's go to Stark Vegas. And Trey, you said that Stark Vegas, especially at 11 a.m., is where teams go to die. This is an 11 a.m. kick on ESPN. The 14th ranked LSU Tigers are 10-point favorites down in Cowbell Nation. Tell me why LSU should be concerned, if not on upset alert for this game.
Yeah, I don't have any statistic. I don't have any numbers. I don't have any data to back up my take, but just doesn't it feel like at least once or twice a year we get an 11 a.m. kick in Starkville, Mississippi. The road team, maybe the higher ranked team, is just not awake yet, and the cowbells are clanging, and Mississippi State comes out hot and firing, and maybe doesn't pull the upset, but definitely makes things interesting. It just feels like that happens once or twice every year. Feels like it's happened to LSU before too. And so, after what we saw from LSU in the second half of that Florida State game, I know that they blew out, I think it was Grambling last week. And I know that they exercised a lot of demons, hopefully, on the offensive side of the ball. But after what we saw in the second half of that Florida State game, there's just a ton of question marks for LSU for me. We saw it all offseason with what Brian Kelly was saying. We saw that he was not confident. We were concerned that he wasn't going to use his best playmaker on the defensive side of the ball, and that came to fruition with Harold Perkins not rushing the passer and trying to play more of a coverage linebacker against Florida State. We saw how that worked out for him. I don't know. Mississippi State still isn't their complete best version of themselves on the offensive side of the ball yet. They're still trying to break in that new scheme, moving away from the air raid to more of a nuanced scheme, more balanced scheme. But I just think that they are able to keep it close at home. Call me, whatever you want. This feels like one of those games on a sleepy week that we're looking up in the fourth quarter and saying, oh, LSU is in deep trouble, right? Garrett, you said it off the top that this is one that you could be looking at your screen on an otherwise sleepy Saturday and say, oh, LSU might be eliminating themselves from playoff contention right now in Starkville, Mississippi. So I think Mississippi State, especially at home, is going to play this one tough. This is a big, big rivalry game for them. Definitely means more to Mississippi State than it does to LSU. LSU has bigger aspirations than beating Mississippi State. But Mississippi State really wants to beat LSU. So I think they keep it within 10. LSU might sneak it out late, but Mississippi State, I think, is definitely keeping it within 10 points in this one.
Yeah, Trey, I think you got a point about it, being a sleepy game and maybe Mississippi State sneaking them up on them. And look, I love Will Rogers as much as the next guy. I think he's a fantastic quarterback. I think he's going to have a great pro career. I think he's a great quarterback. But the only difference I'm going to take on that is I think LSU has to be keyed in, and they're going to be. I think realizing that after their week one loss, which was not particularly convincing, right? It's not like you can, lose another game but say, oh, but we played the Seminoles close. You got smoked, right? you got blown out the water. They got to kind of lick their wounds a little bit, and they have to be basically perfect the rest of the way if they want a chance at a playoff, right? They can go win their conference with, a one loss in the SEC West division, but 2 losses ain't going to get you in, not this year especially, right? There's so many good teams across this country, and I think we're expecting a lot of big things across the board from people. So I think LSU has to be keyed in, and I think they have to start strong, and I think that they will. Looking at, kind of Jaden Daniels, I went and pulled up his game logs. Terrible game against Florida State with 59% completions. He did have the over 300 yards, but the touchdown, the interception just wasn't effective enough to really keep that team in the game. Bounces back, obviously, Grambling State, but 75% completions, 269, 5 touchdowns, only missed 6 throws in that game. I'm pretty pleased with the bounce back. I think he's going to get back on track. I think you're going to see another strong performance from Jaden Daniels, and I think that we're going to go ahead and watch LSU kind of roll this one out. I do think it'll be close for about a half. I think for about a half, it'll be competitive, and then LSU goes in the locker room, makes their adjustments, and then takes care of business against the Bulldogs.
I'm somewhere in the middle of both of those takes because I'm going to take the Tigers minus the number here. I went back over the last 12, 13 years, and Trey, initially I was kind of on that bandwagon too, right? That, how does LSU play, especially on the road in the morning? Historically, Stark Vegas has not necessarily been a place where they've tripped up, even where they've played remarkably close games. Now, of course, there are going to be those 1 and 2 point wins sprinkled into any series. But I do find myself thinking, okay, LSU does need to show up ready to win this game, right? They absolutely do need to come out and fire from the word go. I do think this is going to be a close game late, but I think it's of the 7-point nature with an LSU touchdown at the end, taking them over that number. So I'm not saying that LSU blows Mississippi State out of the water, but I do think they are the much better team. They have the better athletes. If it's historically not a weird place for them to play in the morning, obviously each team is different, but maybe that Starkville magic doesn't necessarily apply at 11 a.m. to the LSU Tigers. So I'm going to go with the better team. It's a big number. This is another one of those lines that I referenced earlier where it's like, I'd rather just not bet this game than fall off on the wrong side. But give me LSU minus the 10. I think Mississippi State's just working in too many new elements, right, to the offense. They're obviously a defensive first team. They were blowing Arizona out early, and then they let the Wildcats back into that game. So the defense isn't even as uptight, I think, at home is what we've become accustomed to. Give me the Tigers and the better athletes here on this.
And to clarify real quick, maybe not necessarily for LSU, it's a tricky place to play, but just in general, right?
Yes.
Like top teams come in there and sometimes really struggle. But LSU, to your point, has fared really well there over the years.
Other than all the games that they had to give back because of the NCAA ruling, that was one of the most bizarre trips down memory lane. All these LSU teams that are 0-3 in their official records, and just the message over and over again: revoked due to a 2003 or 2023 NCAA decision, over and over and over again.
And it was only 28-25 the last time they went to Starkville in 2021. So.
True. That's true. It was. There are some close games there. I can hear Mississippi State fans yelling through the radio. Remember the game that we blew them out in 2020, right? I hear you.
They were garbage in 2020, though. LSU was terrible.
They might be garbage this year. We'll see.
Well, we'll see.
Let's move on to the final of our big three. South Carolina going on the road between the hedges to play number 1 Georgia. The Bulldogs are 27.5-point favorites. 2:30 p.m. game on CBS. I think you look at this initially and go, guys, why on earth is this one of the featured games of the week? Trey, I'm going to turn to you here because you pointed out in pre-show prep, Spencer Rattler has not been an issue. He's not been a red flag for this South Carolina team. You feel like that number is kind of egregiously large.
I do. I think it's disrespectful to how Spencer Rattler has played this season. Now, I know I can already hear the people saying that Spencer Rattler is, not a great quarterback. And I definitely agree with that over his career as a whole. But if you haven't been paying attention the last 2 weeks, the guy's completed 83.3% of his passes against North Carolina and Furman. And I know that North Carolina is not known for their defensive prowess, especially against the passing game, and Furman is an FCS team. But if you just think about what that would have been last year, it's probably closer, even against those two teams, to the 50% range than it is to the 80 to 85% range. So the guy was the SEC Player of the Week last week for a reason. He only missed on 2 passes last week against FCS Furman. And I think that the offense is going to be ready to go. I think that they're going to have, Shane Beamer and the boys are going to have a really good game plan in this one. I'm pulling up the Winsipedia right now, but South Carolina has been a bugaboo for Georgia in the past, right? They've been on cruise control. I think it was 2019 when they go into Athens, I believe, and knock off the Bulldogs. And that's definitely one that Georgia always remembers. I think they're going to keep it close this week. I think Georgia wins this one handily in the end. I don't think that they're going to really necessarily, we're going to look back at this one and they've struggled, but I do think that they'll keep it relatively close. And listen, I know Georgia won this one 48-7 last year in Columbia, but different set of players, different scheme, different, quarterback for the Bulldogs in this one. I think South Carolina keeps it closer than the 27.5. If you're looking for a reason for why we're highlighting this game when it's a 4-touchdown spread, this is really the only time we get to see a possible upset game of Georgia. And I say that term loosely. It's 28-point spread. I know we're not really putting them on upset watch, but the next time that Georgia plays a home game of this caliber, I think we're looking all the way at November 11th when Ole Miss comes to town. So it's going to be a long time before we're seriously considering the Dogs even possibly on upset watch this week. I don't think they are this week, but this is going to be, I think, a game that's closer than what many people are expecting.
Garrett, the conventional wisdom and a point that I'm getting ready to make is play in the trenches for South Carolina has been really concerning. If Spencer Rattler is able to stay upright and avoid turnovers, I think it actually is feasible to say that South Carolina could put the Dogs on upset watch. It's not like Georgia has blown everyone away on offense the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the big point as to why I am taking them plus the 27.5. At the end of the day, I don't think that Georgia has proved they're an elite offense. I still think they're missing something at wide receiver to really help out Carson Beck. He hasn't been bad. He hasn't had a bad season so far. Just hasn't really been impressive yet. He's completed a high percentage of his passes. I'll pull up his stats again one more time real quick. High percentage of his passes, 72% for 577, 3 touchdowns, and interception. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's against some poor competition. And the yards per attempt may be slightly lacking in that department at just over 9. But I don't know. I'm not convinced on Georgia's offense quite yet. And yeah, South Carolina, they can't do anything on the line of scrimmage. They're piss poor on line of scrimmage. They ran the ball for like 3 yards all year. It's just really bad. And a lot of that came out of the 700 sacks that Spencer Rattler took as well. So that's not going to help your cause. But I do think that Spencer Rattler has done enough so far to show that even when the rest of the offense isn't working, things are going to go just fine, and they can find a way to overcome that. So I'm looking forward to watching this one. I think Xavier Leggett has a really good game in this one. Kind of shows out a little bit on the big stage. And I don't think they win. I don't think they really compete with Georgia, but I think they cover the 27.5.
It is interesting. I dove into the numbers, and we've got, I believe last I checked, 55% of the money coming in on Georgia to cover what is a large spread. South Carolina is only 5-10 against the spread in their last 15 games. Now, I'm certainly not the betting expert that's going to be able to tell you why that is, but I do think it's an interesting trend that builds to kind of my gut reaction for this game. Georgia's due for a neck crack. They have not really had it. They've started slow on offense in both of these first 2 games. Carson Beck's completing 72% of his passes. That's not necessarily the issue. The running game has really struggled for Georgia. But, Garrett, as I led into this point with, South Carolina in the trenches is abysmal. And
They
I
are.
think it's going to be a long game for Spencer Rattler. I think he's going to be running for his life on offense. I think the defense is really going to struggle to stop anything that Georgia throws against them. Kind of elite playmakers or not aside, Georgia is a very physical football team. And credit to North Carolina, they upped their physicality this offseason, right? They showed up to Charlotte with a new and improved edge. Georgia's that on an exponential scale. And so for me, I know it's a high number, but at home, the Bulldogs are going to be ready. Trey, you mentioned it. Their home schedule sucks. Folks are going to be ready to see some actual competition against an SEC team. I think they're going to ruin the Gamecocks' day. I'm taking Georgia minus the number. I may look back and laugh at myself for taking a 4-touchdown spread, but I also won't be just shocked if Georgia, wins this one 42-10 going away. Those are our big 3 games, but this week there are really kind of interesting games all over the place. And so the delineation kind of stops there. We've got a bunch of other games that we want to break down, starting with number 11, Tennessee on the road at Florida, 6 p.m. in the Swamp. The Gator fans are going to be ravenous to upset Tennessee. Guys, Tennessee has not won back-to-back games against Florida since 2003 and 2004. 2003 is also the last time that the Volunteers won in the Swamp. If you talk to Volunteer fans, they are extremely nervous about this game, even though on the periphery, Florida is not that good of a team, or at least they don't appear to be. Tennessee's offense, while it has started sluggishly, should have the firepower to more than outrace a Florida Gators team that just can't throw the football, to be quite frank. This line, to me, on paper, should be much larger than 6.5, but it's not. And that has my spidey senses tingling. Garrett, you responded to Jake Crane, a colleague of ours, on Twitter when he asked, is anyone out there taking Florida outright over Tennessee? You laughed, sent a GIF, and I told you, hang on. You haven't read the show notes, because I am going to take the Florida Gators to pull off a home victory. Give me the Gators plus the 6.5. I think they keep this very, very close at the least. But for me, this is Florida against Joe Milton. And Joe Milton has not done a single thing to make me feel like he's the guy that he was hyped up to be this year. We've watched him struggle to separate himself at an elite level his entire career. He lost the job at Michigan when he was the next big thing. He lost the job at Tennessee when Hendon Hooker came in. He was kind of given the job this year by default. I know he had to hold off a very talented 5-star true freshman, but still, apples and oranges. To me, this is a massive road test that I don't believe we've seen anything that leads me to believe he can pass this. I think the Gators find a way to win this game.
Yeah, speaking of your spidey senses there, Mitch, the GIF was exactly the J. Jonah Jameson laughing and then going, "You serious?" Right? That was my response to Jake Crane asking, are people really actually thinking about picking Florida in this? And I was like, you've got to be joking me. Look, I understand, but let's kind of back off of I'm going to call it Joe Milton slander. Okay, I don't think that he's an excellent, fantastic, all-world quarterback like Hendon Hooker was last year. But the guy's completed 66% of his passes, over 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks, clean sheet there. It's not impressive in terms of the yards per attempt. It's not necessarily anything there. A lot of dinking and dunking, not necessarily pushing the ball as far down the field as they did last year. But, guys, what Tennessee's able to do on the ground is going to be my big key factor here. They got Jalen Wright has 233 yards rushing so far, and Jabari Small with 162. That's good for 9.3 and 6.2 per carry for both of those guys. I'm big fans of what I think they're going to be able to do on the ground, especially against a Florida team. Let's rewind just a little bit. I don't know if you can remember, this was like the ancient past at this point, but 2 weeks ago when Florida went to Utah and was clearly not more physical than a Utah team who was missing their starting quarterback and barely beat Baylor last week. Barely struggled to beat the Bears, who are reeling from Texas State, and then they didn't have their starting quarterback, and it still barely took a no-call phantom PI in the end zone for the Bears to blow that one. guys, I don't know that Florida's any good at all. I think that Florida's, I've said this a couple times, Florida's stinky at football this year. They're just not very good. They are not going to be good at football this year. And I think that Tennessee, while they're not the team they were last year, and I don't expect them to be the team that they were last year, Mitch, the arguments you're making about history, those are the same arguments you could have made last year about why they're not going to beat Alabama. And they went ahead and did it. I think things are changing a little bit there in Tennessee. I think they're a better program than they have been historically, and I think that they're going to go ahead and take care of it. Give me Tennessee minus the 6.5. Big statement win for the Vols this week.
I think I'll lean more with Garrett on this one. I'm going to take Tennessee minus the 6.5. I'm really concerned about Florida's defensive line against Tennessee's offensive line, though. I do think, Tennessee was able to keep it interesting against Austin Peay for a little bit too long last week for my liking. I know that they were keeping things extremely vanilla, though, and Joe Milton's still trying to build chemistry with those wide receivers, especially after, Tillman and Hyatt moved on last year. So he's definitely still trying to build chemistry with the new wide receiver core, and I totally get that. Hopefully things have been ironed out over the first two games, but Joe Milton was really, really good in the first 2 weeks, just statistically wise. I'm not as concerned as you are, Mitch, especially in that Virginia game. He looked really, really sharp once he got a couple drives under him. And I think that he's going to have a bit of a coming out party this week. I know the struggles in the swamp. I know that Tennessee, that's just been a house of horrors for them, but I think that they win pretty convincingly this week.
Some of you may be saying, well, you were cautiously optimistic on Quinn Ewers last week. You could make some severe comparisons there, right? Neither had really had their big, statement, go on the road, beat an elite team, do it with a high degree of difficulty. And that's totally fair. I was cautiously optimistic on Quinn. I'm just a little cautious on Joe Milton. Now, the thing that really has me believing that there could be more to this than meets the eye is Florida's metrics on defense. Again, just through a couple of games, but they're 8th against the pass, including that Utah game where take away that opening shot down the field that I didn't see in person because Spectrum was warring with ESPN. But take away that, and they really shut down Utah's passing game. Last week they played McNeese, who doesn't have a pulse. 22nd in total rush defense. And again, looking back to that Utah game, Utah couldn't get anything going on the ground, right? So, Garrett, you say that Florida got out-physicaled by Utah that then struggled against Baylor. I didn't actually see that. Now, their offense couldn't get anything going. That'll give you. But as far as defensively matching up against a tenacious offensive and defensive line in Utah, they competed fairly well. Tennessee's breaking in an entirely new left side of their offensive line. And I'm hoping that Florida finds a way to scheme and take advantage of that to get Joe Milton off of his spot, to do something that Florida has been really good at doing when their defense is elite. That's disguising coverages. That's bringing blitzes from all over the place. Them and Georgia, to me, have a very similar defensive blueprint where blitzes come from both sides of the field. They drop, they'll drop 6 into coverage one play. They'll put their corners on islands. I'm so curious to see how they match up with Joe Milton's rocket of an arm. I think they're going to be able to stop the ground game. So then for me, it becomes Joe Milton against that secondary. Call it Spidey senses. I don't know where that feeling came from, but I started doing the research and thought, this feels like a trap game for Tennessee. This feels like a result that we're waking up Sunday morning and going, wow, how about that? Florida actually pulled it off. So I'll ride with the Gators plus the number. Another SEC team that needs to make a statement, that is number 10 Alabama. Boy, last week did not go well for the Crimson Tide. They are 32-point favorites at South Florida, 2:30 p.m. kick on ABC. Garrett, does Alabama get back on the warpath? Because for me, I would not want to be the next team facing Nick Saban after a loss.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be a brutal day to be a fan of USF. There's just no way around it. Look, I think that the big thing with Alabama right now is they just need to find their identity on offense. They don't know who they are offensively right now. And they're going to get a chance to figure that out this weekend. They're going to be able to play some people, try some stuff out. And I think that they're going to be okay. If you look at some of the rushing stats, I pulled them up. Their leading rusher right now with 92 yards is Jalen Milroe. They don't have a 100-yard rusher on the season yet. They got Jace McClellan with 84, Roydell Williams has 48, and a bunch of other like also rans in the minuscule numbers. Their total scrimmage yardage leader right now, outside of obviously the quarterback, Jermaine Burton with 120 scrimmage yards. That ain't gonna get it done. 60 yards per game currently for an Alabama offensive skill player being your best guy. That just ain't gonna cut it. And so I think that this is a get back on track game for them. I think that obviously, you said number 10 Alabama, and it just didn't sound right in my ear. I was like, oh, I think you said number 2 Alabama, right? No, number 10. I'm sure they're handling things great in Tuscaloosa right now. I'm sure it was another happy-go-lucky week of practice with Nick Saban looking at that double-digit number next to their name. So, look, I think it's a bad weekend to be a fan of USF. It might be even worse to be on the field with them. I'm going to take Bama minus the 32. You give me Bama minus a whole bunch more than 32, and I still think I'd take them. I don't think it's going to be close.
Can we just step back and appreciate how weird this game is that Alabama's playing at USF? I don't know how this got scheduled, maybe for recruiting purposes down in Florida. They couldn't get Miami on the schedule maybe, so they just settled for USF. So I don't know. This is a weird game, but I think Alabama handles it very, very easily. They're going to get an opportunity to see multiple quarterbacks in this game, I think. Milroe's probably going to run for about 200 in the first half. In the second half, they're going to put in a couple different guys and see what they got. And I think that's going to be very, very important for Alabama to see what they have, because I think that they saw that Milroe wasn't it. They want to give him all the shots they can, but I think we'll probably be seeing a new quarterback relatively soon for Alabama if things don't drastically turn around.
What's so concerning is that nobody else in that room was able to win that job, right? I mean, Milroe has...
flag.
Yeah,
big red flag.
Milroe, bless his heart, he is just not a very good quarterback right now. He's a great athlete, but he's not a very good quarterback right now. And the fact that Tyler Buckner couldn't beat him out coming over from Notre Dame, I mean, dude, he's running your system, right? That you ran with Tommy Rees. Like, you should know, you should have the inside track to winning this, and he couldn't do it. So I agree. I think we're going to see a couple different quarterbacks. I think Alabama is just going to be way too physical for South Florida. I really think Alex Golesh is going to turn South Florida around, former offensive line coach at Tennessee. He is going to make a physical unit, I believe, down there in Tampa, but it's not this week, not against the Crimson Tide. I'll take Alabama minus the number as well. A game that in years past would not have been anywhere close to our run sheet, fellas. I think this is a celebration of life. When we talk about Virginia Tech at Rutgers, the Scarlet Knights, given the 6 and the hook, 2:30 p.m. kick on the Big Ten Network. Fellas, lock me up. Rutgers minus the 6.5. Their defense is very, very solid. I wrote about this in their preseason preview. I like what they're doing on defense. And Gavin Wimsatt, Kyle Monaghy, they're moving the football right now. Kyle Monaghy is running for 5+ yards a tote right now. Wimstat's not an X factor throwing the ball through the air, but he's done a nice job. Virginia Tech, on the other hand, listen, Grant Wells can throw 4 touchdowns. He can throw 4 picks in a game. I don't trust Virginia Tech going on the road to a Rutgers team that is finally feeling like, after all these years of monotony, they are building towards something. And bowl contention is absolutely in the cards for Rutgers this year. Give me the Scarlet Knights minus the number. I really like Rutgers. I think this is going to be a little bit of a statement game for them this week.
It could be, and I wouldn't be surprised because that defense has been legit. 7 points a game. I don't care who you're playing. If it's Northwestern and Temple, only giving up 7 points a game is a really, really nice statistic. I wouldn't touch this line with a 10-foot pole because I just don't know what Virginia Tech is. They looked really surprisingly good, I would say, against Old Dominion week 1. And then last week, they kind of pooped the bed a little bit at home against Purdue, a Purdue team that desperately needed a win. But that game took like 12 hours to complete with all the rain delays. So I don't know how you try to find rhythm offensively when you have to keep stopping and starting like that. I know a ton of teams were dealing with that. Some dealt with it better than others, but I think that's the last thing a Virginia Tech team that's trying to find some traction needs. So I don't know. Rutgers at home, I think that's definitely a nice advantage for them. I'm not touching this line at all. If you forced me to pick, I think I would go with Rutgers, but I really wouldn't put any form of actual money on this game. I would take the under, though. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored.
Yeah, no, I was going to say kind of the same thing, Trey. I'm just trying to figure out who Virginia Tech is right now. I think that they're still kind of getting their season started. That's something to, I think, worry about a little bit. So I would be tempted to go Virginia Tech right now, but I think it would hurt Mitch's feelings too much if I picked them. So I'm going to go with Rutgers. I'm going to take them as well, and kind of cap off a nice little story up there for the Rutgers squad up there.
Guys, number 8, Washington. The Huskies are on the road in East Lansing. What formerly, I think when this home and home was scheduled, was supposed to be a really fun non-conference matchup. It has turned into anything but. The Huskies are 16.5-point favorites. Michigan State is at the center of a couple of different scandals. Mel Tucker is suspended, I believe. It seems like maybe he might be fired, but then again, that's a whole another can of worms that I really don't want to jump into right now. It's a 4 p.m. Game on the Peacock Network if you care to tune in. Garrett, I think Washington might hang 50 plus on Sparty. Cornered animal syndrome is very real, but I think you got to be somewhat plucky. You got to have something that you do well for that cornered animal syndrome to kick in. And I don't even know if it matters if it does, because Michigan State, I don't think, is going to be able to stop Washington. I think my Biletnikoff campaign for Rome Odunze keeps rolling right along. I'm going to take the Huskies minus the number here. I think they're favored for 3 scores by 3 scores for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty optimistic for the Spartans. You think they can hold them to just 50? I think this is going to be a bit of a disaster in East Lansing. The situation, the controversy right now, obviously, is going to taint what the game is and what the game kind of was supposed to be. And I know a couple years ago when Michigan State was really good, this is probably one that we were all looking forward to. And now that it's relegated to Peacock, and hoping that you have that service and you're not just catching Office reruns or something there, it's going to be a tough day. So I think this one screams Washington to me. You could give me just about whatever you want to, and I'd still probably pick Washington in this one. Huge day coming in to kind of pad the stats for Michael Penix Jr. and the rest of the crew.
It'll be interesting to compare who gets more airtime on Peacock on Saturday, Michael Penix or Michael Scott. We don't know.
Hey.
But I don't think this one's going to be particularly close. When you look at the situation, it is easy to say this is a textbook cornered animal situation with Michigan State, backs against the wall, no one believing in them, all this controversy, and the team rallies together and does something really special. But just the specifics of this particular situation, which I know we said we didn't want to get into, I won't get into the specifics, but just the back and forth that it's taken everybody through. I'm sure the locker room itself is divided between guys that support Mel Tucker and guys that really don't support Mel Tucker in this situation, guys that believe him, guys that don't believe him. This is just a weird all around situation. Add in the fact that just as a university, Michigan State is probably really apprehensive about supporting this football program right now. I don't have a lot of confidence in the Spartans showing up and doing anything of consequence this week. I would take Washington minus almost any number this week, and I think Michael Penix is going to keep that Heisman campaign rolling.
Guys, remember in the preseason when I said that Oklahoma State should be keeping a wary eye towards what's going on in South Alabama? The Jaguars were a preseason Group of 5 favorite, maybe a New Year's 6 bowl game dark horse, and then they got steamrolled by Tulane. Well, Oklahoma State is 2-0, but boy, it is a shaky 2-0. They beat Central Arkansas in unconvincing fashion. They kind of hung on and pulled away late against Arizona State. I appreciate them trying to keep my West Coast parlay alive. Hate you, Auburn, for blowing that late. But Oklahoma State rolls into this game, 6 p.m. ESPN Plus, 7-point favorites. Now, I looked into the stats, guys, and South Alabama does not do anything particularly well. They're between the 80s and the 90s when it comes to scoring offense, total defense. They just don't do anything at an elite level like they did last year on defense. They were one of the
Small
best
sample
defenses.
size. Small sample size.
Small sample size, but still, it's not been quite the coming out party that I anticipated it might be for South Alabama when I predicted them to beat Tulane. Still, Oklahoma State does not have a secure quarterback room. And that offense has not been the explosive, plucky looking poke offense that I thought it would have to be in order for them to succeed. Now, I don't know that South Alabama wins this game, but I am going to take the Jags on the road, a group of 5 team trying to prove a point on Saturday night. I don't know where Oklahoma State has the horses to pull away convincingly as of right now. Give me the Jags getting back to their defensive ways and keeping this a low-scoring ball game.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about South Alabama in this one. I was with you in the offseason, but they really struggled on their Louisiana twofer to open the season. Obviously, we know about what happened at Tulane. They bounced back in an okay way last week against Southeastern Louisiana, but not really a convincing win. 35-17, not really super convincing what you want to see going into this big Oklahoma State matchup. But like you said, Mitch, Oklahoma State hasn't exactly been convincing either, albeit against better competition. So I'm going to lean South Alabama. I think they're going to be more fired up for this one. Oklahoma State's probably looking ahead to their Big 12 slate starting next week. South Alabama might sneak up and get them.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go with the hot take. I'm going to pick South Alabama to win this game. I think Oklahoma State has looked terrible this year. Super, super disappointed with what the Cowpokes put on there. And I think they're just distracted. It seems like things have been going really, really poorly since about the last quarter of last season and on. It seems like they're distracted. I don't think Mike Gundy's 100% on it. I know things kind of boiled over with some tension in the bowl game as well. And I think that, this is a bad spot for Oklahoma State right now against the South Alabama team that, yeah, they had a rough, kind of first little bit. But if you look at the rushing stats from last year, last week, they only gave up 62 yards on the ground last week on 26 attempts. They did give up a bunch through the air, but being able to stop the run, I think, is going to be what you have to do when you're getting on the road. Oklahoma State hasn't been particularly convincing, I don't think, running the football so far. And I'm just not optimistic that they're going to be able to do very much. So, it's -7. You get it at home. Cool. That's fun. This just kind of feels like the game that's supposed to be the upset on Saturday. When you're looking across the sleepy slate and you're trying to say, well, what's going to be interesting? Surely not everything's going to go chalk. I think this is the one where you're supposed to go, wait, South Alabama beat Oklahoma State at their house? I think that's going to be how that ends up going. So give me South Alabama. I'm going to pick the upset for this one.
I'm gonna have work emails Monday morning from folks that I know listen to this podcast. They're gonna go, "What on earth are you predicting?"
Look, my sister goes to Oklahoma State. I watch enough of their games. She's not feeling good about this one either. So,
guys, a couple other games to kind of sniff around here. The Backyard Brawl. Boy, last year we could not wait for the Backyard Brawl to get on our TVs. It launched the 2022 season. It was a fantastic game. This year, it does potentially neither of those things. Pitt is a 1-point favorite on the road. This is a 6:30 p.m. kick on ABC. I really don't have a leaning either way, right? Like, Pat Narduzzi is known for defense. He's known for tough, hard-nosed football. Phil Dracovic is quarterback, though, and I don't know that I trust this offense. Guys, I got a little bit of slander for my Cincinnati hype this offseason, for my Cincinnati support, and lo and behold, they went and beat the Pitt Panthers last week. West Virginia beat Duquesne. They struggled to get out of the starting gates, but then eventually buried them. Garrett Green's been fine offensively for West Virginia. The defense, though, against Power 5 opponents, I'm really concerned about. My gut reaction is to lean the home team here, especially when it's essentially a pick 'em. But guys, a wise man once said, "You don't get rich backing Neil Brown," and that's a life motto that I live by. So give me Pitt on the road here, minus the point.
Guys, this is going to be a Neil Brown legacy game. I've been beating the drum that Neil Brown is going to do some crazy stuff this year. You thought that it was good when he almost covered against Penn State. Guys, just wait.
Nobody thought that was good. What are you talking about?
I don't know what he's planning to pull out for the backyard brawl at home when his back's against the wall, but it's going to be just insane. I don't know how, I don't know why, but West Virginia wins this game at home. They're going to be singing Country Roads on Saturday night.
Yeah, man, I agree. Legacy game, but it's because they're going to lose in embarrassing fashion at home, and that's going to cement his legacy there at West Virginia. So I think I'm going to pick Pitt here. I don't really like either team, but I do trust Pitt, the half team right now, over West Virginia, the 0 team, or the 1% team, because your quarterback's actually pretty good. But I don't know. I'm going to go with Pitt right now, and it's just kind of a gross game. I don't really feel fantastic about even picking this game because I think it's going to be some ugly, ugly, ugly football.
I would love.
Phil Jurkovec threw the ball 32 times last week.
Uh-huh.
Do you guys know how many he completed of those 32?
Probably not a whole bunch.
Less than 50%, right?
Oh, yeah. He completed 10 of 32 passes last week against Cincinnati.
Oh,
and of those 10 completions, it was about 18 yards or about 10 yards of completion. So it was not a good outing for Phil Jurkovec.
No, Cincinnati's defense had them in knots last week. I do wonder, depending on after this game, we might have to hold a quorum and vote. Do we change cornered animal syndrome to Neil Brown syndrome, depending on
I like it
of this game? Yeah,
if he wins, I'll say it. If he wins it, I will refer to
cornered animal. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll table that for next week for the recap. Guys, Army at UTSA. This is the third ever meeting on Friday night, 6 p.m. ESPN is where you can find this. The road team has won both previous matchups. Army is going to the Dome. I saw a great tweet asking members of the UTSA ROTC program who on earth they were supposed to back, where their loyalties lie here. UTSA is 9-point favorites. Guys, Army can score some points. Now they may do it unconventionally, but they can score some points. I'm fading UTSA a little bit more by the week. I did take them to beat Texas State. They did that, but 9 points on a Friday night playing Army. I don't know that I want to give you multiple scores. Give me the Black Knights to cover that spread.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there, Mitch. I'm going to take them to cover the spread. I think UTSA wins, but I think Army's going to cover the spread. They're going to score enough points. UTSA has been less than impressive, to say the least. I think they need to get right. It's not going to be now. So yeah, give me Army to cover, and we'll move on from that.
This was a wild game that went to overtime last year at West Point. It was 41-38 UTSA. As a final, I think it's a close one again. I'm taking Army plus the 9 as well.
Last 3 games here. Tell me, we've got 2 SEC teams to work through. Ole Miss, 20-point favorites, hosting Georgia Tech on Saturday night on ESPN. If you want to go over to ESPN2 at the same time, you'll find Arkansas hosting BYU. Anything stand out to you guys in this game, Garrett? I mean, Ole Miss pulled away a little bit against Tulane, but that game was a 1-score affair up until a fumble and a scoop and score for the Ole Miss Rebs. Arkansas never really pulled away from Kent State last week. Which way are you leaning on these games?
Yeah, I think looking at Ole Miss, I've been really impressed with their ability to pass the ball this year, right? I think I've been a lot more impressed with Jackson Dart being able to be an effective passer, definitely surpassing his performance from last year, doing a lot better this year with that. And I think possibly by necessity, right? A lot of defenses have been giving him stacked boxes saying Quinshon Judkins is not going to beat me this year. And that's fair. You got to play that game. I think that's going to be how Georgia Tech tries to line up. I think they're going to try to say, we're going to stop the run. And I don't think they quite have the talent on the back end to stop them. I think Georgia Tech can kind of keep up in this game, but I am going to pick Ole Miss to win, not by 20. Not by 20. I'm going to pick Georgia Tech to cover the Ole Miss victory, comfortable victory. Give me 14 points, something like that. BYU at Arkansas. I'm going to take Arkansas to cover this. I think, BYU is just booty butt right now. They're just terrible. And I'm going with Arkansas. I don't think they're necessarily as good as a lot of people are picking them to be right now. But they are better than BYU. And I think this game at home in front of the fans, kind of get a fun, environment out there, a team you don't normally play. So, yeah, give me Arkansas minus the 9.5 to win comfortably as well.
Yeah, I think both the SEC teams win comfortably as well. I'm actually going to take Ole Miss to cover late. I think they pull away late against Georgia Tech. And Arkansas, look, we saw it last year when these two teams met in Provo. I was worried about the altitude. I was worried about the road situation for Arkansas, and Arkansas just ran up and down that field on the Cougars. Just a different caliber of athlete for Ole Miss and Arkansas when compared to Georgia Tech and BYU right now. So I'll take both of those teams to cover at home.
Surprising, considering BYU's just hosting a squad full of 28-year-olds. But I'm also going to take the SEC teams to cover. Ole Miss, I think, pulls away. They can do it late. They can do it in the second quarter. Georgia Tech's plucky, but I do like the Rebs offense. And then, yeah, Arkansas. I don't know if BYU is going to score. I don't think Arkansas is a great team this year. I made that very clear in the preseason predictions, but BYU's offense is lethargic at best. Going on the road, I just don't know. Arkansas can take the air out of the ball with Rocket Sanders. Give me the Hogs to cover that.
Do we know if he's healthy? I know he didn't play last week against Middle Tennessee, but
I think there's a chance that he plays, but I don't actually know if he is playing. So maybe put a little asterisk, an asterisk by that. I haven't seen something that said he is or is not playing. I just kind of assumed he would be back, but I guess we'll wait and see. Final game.
Just looked it up. He will not be playing.
He will not be playing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I still think Arkansas can take the air out of the ball.
On SI, he will not be playing against BYU.
Okay. That's the problem with all of Arkansas's great players. Like, they just can't stay healthy. And that was one of the things that we highlighted in the preseason. So I still will take Arkansas minus the points. Their defense is good enough. TCU. 7-point favorites on the road. Big 12 opener for Houston. Apologies if you watched the Ledger. Listen, a lot of moving parts and pieces, all right? I get it. You're in the big boys leagues now, although Dana Holgerson is not coaching like it. But Houston, 7 points. Dogs at home, 7 p.m. kick on Fox. I made the comment in the Ledger, we don't know what TCU is. We know that Houston's offense is going to score, but can their defense come to play? They lost against Rice last week, a notorious offensive powerhouse. For some reason, I'm more inclined to say the home dog here in a rivalry game keeps this close enough. I don't know if Houston's going to win this outright or not. It might come down to a defensive stand. But 7 points at home, give me the dog here. I'll take the Cougars in a bounce back effort.
Do we know Houston's going to score points? Because through the first 2 weeks of the season, I don't know that that's necessarily been how I would describe their offensive effort. They were sitting at 7 points going into the fourth quarter against Rice last week before furiously rallying.
And then they did. Scored.
They did. They got to 28 in regulation, and double overtime got them to 41. But listen, I think TCU is going to boat race Houston. I know the emotion involved in the first home game for Houston. That's a huge, huge deal for that program. Finally be back playing power conference football. I think TCU is going to boat race them. I don't think it's going to be particularly close. And TCU is better than what they showed defensively against Colorado. They just got blitzkrieged against Colorado. I think they show more true colors of who they are this Saturday against Houston.
Yeah, I think the TCU Colorado game was truly just a shock. They had to go out there against Colorado with no tape on film whatsoever. They had no idea what they were going to be running. They got kind of surprised in a couple of spots, the surprise turnovers that shifted momentum wildly. And they were still in that game and controlling it at times. So, I think TCU, I'm going to take TCU to boat race Houston again. I think that this is going to be a good bounce back, good statement for that team from the 8-1-7. So we're gonna hold it down with my guys over here on this side of the Metroplex. Give me the Horned Frogs. Give me a whole bunch of points, and let's take out Houston and come back home with a dub.
Trey, what do we say about college football, even when the slate's missing a bunch of little numbers next to names?
All football is good football.
Amen. And that'll be put to the test here in week 3. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you're a new subscriber, a new viewer on YouTube, a new listener over on Spotify, Apple, we're happy to have you. Check out our affiliate over the transfer portal, CFB. Check out all the coverage that they've got going on game days. Visit homefieldapparel.com. Use our code 3TechPod for 15% off if you're a new buyer. Just enjoy a college football weekend. We're excited for it. All football is good football, and we plan to enjoy it right here on the 3 Technique. Make sure you tune in Sunday morning. You'll have your recap up and ready to go there, and we will keep marching along as college football season just gets better and better. For Trey Reeves and Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious him. How about